Hey, good afternoon and good morning, depending on where you are. My name is Tom, and I'm one of the regional sales managers, for Gusmer Enterprises. And I'm here today to present water deaeration, the Denwel series webinar, number 4 of 5 in the series. Thanks for joining me, and I'll be joined a little bit later here by Mike Majorco, the product manager for brewing technology at Gusmer and the product manager for Denwel. Let's get started. A quick agenda for today's webinar. We're just gonna have a quick overview of who Gusmer is and who our partner Denwel is, overview of the two companies. Then we're gonna go over the different styles of water deaeration. We sell two specific styles for the most part, cold column and membrane deaeration. And we're going over how those two different options work and the differences between them. Then we'll have some general tips and application advice on how to use deaered water in your facility. Mike Majorco will then be going over the different system options available from Denwel. And at the very end, we'll have a question and answer. If you have any questions, there's a little Q&A section in Zoom. So if you want to click on that and enter your questions there as opposed to the normal chat, we'll be able to see that at the end of the webinar and be able to address all the questions that you have come up with during the presentation. Just want to go over quick about how to find your Gusmer representative. So Gusmer does have representatives all over North America. If you go to gusmerenterprises.com and then click on Find a Rep at the very top of the screen, set your city and state and your industry and hit the Go button. It'll bring up your Gusmer representative for your area. So just a little bit about Gusmer. Founded in 1918, so we're a family-owned company, currently in 3rd generation ownership and management. We really pride ourselves on our work with fermentation and filtration. Those are our two core competencies. And we manufacture as well as resale a number of different products and services for the food, beverage, and biopharmaceutical industries. As I mentioned, we have a number of different sales reps for North America. And we also have different product managers like Mike Majorco managing each of their different product lines, as well as our vendors and distributors. And we also have a number of different R&D scientists. So we have a couple different locations in the United States, Mountainside, New Jersey, customer support, sales staff, and warehousing. In Waupaca, Wisconsin, we do have a production facility and an R&D lab. And then in California, R&D lab, as well as warehousing and manufacturing. And then a couple different wine stores in Napa and Windsor. And then just a quick overview of Denwel. So Denwel has been around for a while, in 1997, privately owned and located in the Czech Republic, both the headquarters and the manufacturing facility. The owners and founders are still very involved in day-to-day operations, and they are very nimble, and they can customize different products. So today we'll be going over the deaeration systems that they have. But just to be aware, they do have the capability of making custom systems. We're going to be going over some of their skid-mounted solutions, but they can pretty much optimize and design the systems for any facility, any requirements. So if you have some specific needs that you might not think can apply to a skid-based system, I think you'd be surprised at what we can accomplish. So very knowledgeable group of people. And as I mentioned, they do the water deaeration, inline gas injection, blending and dosing, which we've gone over in past webinars, flash pasteurization, and then our upcoming webinar will be on CIP. So just a quick overview of why do we not want oxygen? So what is deaered water? Deaered water is essentially water that has had the majority of the molecular oxygen removed from the solution. So why do you not want oxygen in your water? So anytime you move beer, whether it's between the primary fermenter, secondary, through centrifuge or filtration into your bright tanks or into your packaging lines, you risk exposing your final product to oxygen. After fermentation, the beginning of fermentation, oxygen has negative effects on beer, and it can have a number of different various chemical reactions that produce a high color, especially if you have ever seen some of the newer New England IPAs, very hop heavy. If they get oxygen into package, flavor can change very dramatically. Color can change very dramatically. You can also have changes to flavor. Wet cardboard, sherry, other stale flavors can develop with oxygen in package. And then haze stability. So colloidal issues reacting with metal ions in process can lead to chill haze and permanent haze in the end. So you have hazy beer when you don't want hazy beer. And it's highly reactive. So just a little tiny bit will impact your flavor, color, and haze stability in your beer. And we're talking parts per billion, not parts per million. So very, very minute amount of oxygen in solution will have these effects. As I mentioned, there's two different types of water deaeration systems that we're going to be talking about today. The first one is the cold column style. So as you can see on the right-hand side here, here's kind of a little cutout of what the system looks like. It's a tall column, and we'll be looking at some pictures of the entire system a little bit further here in the presentation. But the column is filled with a high efficiency structured packing. What is that? Well, you can kind of see it in this picture. I'm going to skip ahead just real quick. This is what the packing looks like. You can see that it's stainless steel. It's got a number of high surface area. And this entire column is packed with these little packets of stainless steel all the way up to the top. And what that does is it ensures a large surface area and contact area between the water and the stripping gas we're going to be using. So if you're looking at the diagram here, water flows in from the very top where that blue arrow is. Gas comes in at the bottom where that green arrow is. So as the water is moving down through the column, gas is moving up through the column. And dissolved oxygen is removed as they flow against each other. And the gas phase oxygen then leaves with the stripping gas that flows through the structured packing out the top of the column. Once again, the picture of the structured packing. And then the membrane. So membrane's a little bit different. It's much smaller, and like I said, you'll see this in a little bit here with the different skid types. But the membrane contains thousands of microporous hydrophobic hollow fibers. So lots of these little tiny straws that are inside this membrane. And they, like the structured packing, form a large internal surface area that provides a large contact area for the gas and the liquids. The stripping gas is then applied on the inside of the hollow tubes and is pulled out by a vacuum. And the water flows counter current on the outside of the fibers. And that big difference with the vacuum and the water, that high difference in partial pressure forces the oxygen out of the water and then out of the membrane. So just a real quick overview of where can you use deared water. There are so many uses for deared water in a brewery. It's one of my most favorite things to work on, to sell to customers, because there's just so many applications for it. And I think any brewery would make a very smart choice to bring it in for a lot of reasons. We'll go over them here. High gravity brewing. We talked about this on our last webinar with carbo blending, making high gravity seltzers or high gravity beers. It provides you a medium to a low oxygen medium to blend with your product to get down to the package sales alcohol content. So if you're making something like 8, 10, 12, 15%, you blend it down with deared water. Purging of pipes. So anytime that you are moving beer, you can use gas, CO2 or nitrogen to purge pipes, but you can also use water. And this can have the added effect then too of if you're doing heat sanitizing with hot water, pushing deared water through those pipes will cool it down, so you're not wasting as much beer and you don't have any foaming with your beer. You can use it to push out or purge centrifuges, excuse me, filtration and bottle fillers or can fillers. One of the best things that we did at my previous position as a brewer was we brought in deared water, and with that we're able to hot sanitize or centrifuge in the filter, bring in deared water, cool it down, purge it of oxygen, follow it with beer, and at the very end of the run, follow it with deared water once again, and push out every little bit of beer in the system with high confidence that there's not going to be any oxygen, integrated into the beer at that point. So we're able to maximize our yields in a very safe and efficient way. Mixed tanks. So if you use a diatomaceous earth filter, like a candle filter or horizontal leaf filter. You can use deared water for your mixing up your DE, or if you're using silica, PVPP as stabilizing agents, you can use it to mix those up. Colloidal silica, you can use it to use smaller amounts of colloidal silica and get good mixing with the deared water to push into your tanks to help stabilize that way. And you can also mix it with like powdered stabilizers such as citric acid before you're pumping it into your mixed tanks or your bright tanks, and not introduce any extra oxygen. Pushing beer from one process to another. So this is similar to what I talked about with the centrifuges and filtration. So if you're pushing beer to the filler or pushing beer to another facility, you can use it and essentially use a deared water to push the beer around in a way so that there's no gas bubbles, the pipes are cooled, and so that there's no oxygen getting in. You can use it to move yeast around too. So if you're pulling yeast from tanks and you need to push out the pipe volumes, you can push yeast around this way. If you have extremely thick yeast, you can mix it with deared water too to get a slightly looser slurry so that it can be injected easier or move it easier through your system. And also in bright tanks, for CIP and final rinses of bright tanks, you're trying to get to a low dissolved oxygen level in your headspace. Using deared water as your final rinse can help with that. And if you're also CIPing under pressure, if you're doing acid rinses or sanitizing rinses under pressure, and you need to follow it up with the rinse, then you can use deared water for that purpose as well. So just a couple application tips about how to utilize it then. And once you know where you want to use it, how are you going to use it? So batch style or on demand, you can set up your deared water skid to essentially work on demand. There is a startup period. So when you start your deared water, it will go into a recirculation loop until it reaches the desired dissolved oxygen levels. So it's not on demand as instantaneous, but it can be pretty quick. And then you have to size it to a size then that you can utilize in a meaningful way at your brewery. So if you need, say, 40 barrels per hour, you'll need to size it to that spec. However, if you do a batch style, this would entail then using a buffer tank or some sort of holding tank to run your deared water to. And with this style system, you can have a smaller system and make deared water during off hours and collect it and then use it as needed around the brewery. So the cold column style does impart some carbonation, but we can also, and Mike will talk about this in just a moment, you can also add pre-carbonation. So if you are doing carbo blending or blending of other products, you can carbonate the deared water going out of the deared water system and already have carbonated product at that point. You can also set up recirculation with the buffer tank. So this is one of my favorite ways to use it. So if you have a buffer tank or holding tank that you're going to be filling with deared water, you can then have pump manifolds come off of that tank and run a loop through your facility with different drops around it. So you can put a drop by, for instance, say your yeast brink or your centrifuge or your packaging line, and your brewers and cellar staff, packaging staff will be able to hook up to those various drops and be able to utilize deared water throughout the entire facility and really maximize your potential to reduce oxygen in your beer. As I mentioned earlier, you can recover more beer during filtration or centrifugation. Being able to push out lenticular filters or plate and frame filters or DE filters and get every last, more or less, bit of beer in that system is extremely helpful and is a great point to bring up when talking to your CapEx team on ROI for a system like this. And really recommend it, just use it anywhere and everywhere that comes in contact with finished beer. As I mentioned, oxygen is highly reactive, and if you are going to be moving beer around, it is extremely advantageous to be using deared water for those types of projects. And Mike, I believe this is where you're going to take over.
Thanks, Tom. Good afternoon, everybody. As Tom mentioned, I'm Mike Majorco. I am Gusmer Enterprises Product Manager for Brewing Technology. And among the different lines of brewing equipment and supplies that I handle, Denwel is one of them. So as Tom kind of touched on, there are a few different ways to create deaerated water with equipment in your brewery. And the ones that we're going to focus on today are the cold column systems and the membrane systems. So your options basically that we're going to talk about today are those two, and they can bring the dissolved oxygen level in your water to 10 ppb or less, and you can utilize either carbon dioxide or nitrogen as your stripping gas to accomplish this. It just kind of depends on what you have available in your brewery and what you would prefer to use. These systems are semi-automatic. So as Tom alluded to, you basically turn them on. They have a bit of a startup phase until they reach the desired dissolved or set point of the dissolved oxygen in the water, and then they will start to produce from there. Next slide, please, Tom. So in addition to the pieces of equipment themselves, there are some standard options that can also be incorporated on either system. And it would be an O2 analyzer. So if you want to really know for certain, what the DO level in the water is, you can add that. If you don't want to take for granted that the thing is functioning within specification and you want to know for certain, you can add that. Cooling, you can add either an ice water or probably what's more popular in our North American market here is the glycol cooling system. This would be useful depending upon what you're going to use the DAW for in your brewery. If you want to blend it with cold beer, it'd probably be best if it was similar to the temperature of the beer so that you didn't cause any problems with gas breakout or anything like that. Also, in some places in North America, the city water is really quite warm, and so you just may want to have the option to cool this down. It's always just oftentimes good to have a cold process in your brewery, and this of course is an option that's added downstream of the column. Of course, the colder the water is, the harder it is to deaerate, so you cool it down after you've deaerated it. Another option that you can add is pre-carbonation. This is where we would incorporate a manual carbonation jet in the system. And while Tom did mention that the cold column naturally carbonates a little bit, it's not very much. It's maybe like 1 gram per liter. So if you add the pre-carbonation, you can add an additional 1 to 4 grams per liter of carbon dioxide in the DAW, of course, pressure and temperature dependent. Next slide, please, Tom. So of the two systems, we'll start with the cold column system. So it's really a pretty popular way to do this. These are comparatively inexpensive. And they, as mentioned, will get the deaerated, the DO level in your DAW down to 10 ppb or less. They come in a broad range of sizes, really to suit any type of brewery, from 1 to 5 inch sizes, and they can do 4 to 1,000 hectoliters per hour or 4 to 852 barrels per hour. So really kind of a broad range of production depending on what your need is. As Tom mentioned before, they function with a high surface area structured stainless packing, which resides in the column, basically from the area with the site class that you see at the bottom and then on up. And they work with via PLC control in a semi-automated fashion for easy and reliable production. Basically, you have everything connected, you start the unit, and then it will go through its startup phase and then make deaerated water for you. They have a broad range of operating temperatures, 40 to 90 Fahrenheit, 8 to 30 Celsius, and they are conveniently skid mounted and relatively easy and straightforward to assemble. The dimensions are typically, the biggest concern for the dimension is typically the height of the column, which starts at 5.5 meters. And then the width and length of the skids are relatively inconsequential, from a 1 meter width and up, and from a 0.5 meter depth and up. It is possible though, however, if you do have special concerns or special space constraints in your brewery, Denwel, as mentioned by Tom, are really pretty flexible in their engineering, and within reason can typically accommodate custom dimensions. The other thing that we can mention here too is that although we're looking at a single column unit here, where that you would have that 5.5 and up height, it is possible to do split column units. They're a little bit more elaborate and a little bit more expensive, basically just because you're duplicating the main function here on the unit. Next slide, please, Tom. So the other option we were going to discuss today was the membrane unit. again, can deliver the same spec for DO and the DAW as the column unit, and it also comes in a relatively broad range of sizes, not quite as large as the column units. They can produce from 4 to 170 barrels an hour, or 4 to 200 hectoliters per hour. And Tom kind of mentioned how these things function and the principle behind them. And you have that large surface area hydrophobic membrane contactor. And again, they function in sort of a semi-automated fashion, just as the other one does. The same parameters as far as the operating temperature is concerned. And I think really the primary purpose for one of these is if you are really tight on space in your brewery, you really only have a tiny corner to tuck it into. And as you can see that the skid dimensions here are considerably smaller with a starting height of 1.6 meters, width of 7/10 of a meter, and a depth of 6/10. Now, of course, the larger they get, the bigger those dimensions are, but they're still considerably smaller than the column units. Next slide, please. I guess that's basically it as far as discussing the system. So we can open it up to any questions that anybody might have on any of these.
Yeah, we do have a couple of questions that have come in. The first question is, what does annual maintenance entail?
I'll say that kind of depends based upon use. Denwel does offer maintenance kits for these units that consist of seals, valve seats, things that might wear over time, depending on what type of gas they're exposed to, what type of environment they're in, how heavily you use them. It may just be a good idea to do an inspection at an interval, maybe quarterly, semi-annual, or annual CIP, and maybe just have a handful of spare parts on hand in case you need them.
Yeah, the cold column style too is very robust in its design and can be easily CIP'd and cleaned. As I mentioned, the structured packing is just all stainless steel, so it's a hardy piece of equipment, and can easily stand up to typical CIP procedures.
The next question we have, can you use nitrogen?
Yeah, as we touched upon briefly in the presentation, you could use either CO2 or nitrogen in the system. And again, as mentioned, it's really kind of up to you and what you have available as a utility in your brewery, and what you prefer to use. I know if you're buying it from a supplier, nitrogen can be more expensive than CO2. You probably already have CO2 in your brewery, but if you are either looking to not put extra CO2 into the environment at large, or into your work environment or where your employees are, nitrogen might be a good consideration. Also, if you happen to have a nitrogen generator or we're looking for a reason to get one, this could be an idea for you to use instead of carbon dioxide.
And just like with your carbonation CO2, make sure you get COAs from your gas vendors and making sure that you're putting high purity CO2 or nitrogen through the system, 99.99% or better.
Absolutely.
The next question we have, how does stripping gas consumption compare between the membrane and cold column systems?
My recollection is that it's pretty close. So this might be a good opportunity to remind everybody that you could use the find a rep button to ask more detailed questions, and your rep can either get to me if they can't answer it then on their own. But it's really, I think it's pretty similar if I recall correctly.
And that looks like that's all the questions that we have coming in right now.
We do have a couple one other webinar coming up. So on Tuesday, August 10th, as I mentioned, we will have one final webinar, the 5th of the series, CIP, Make Your Life Easier. So Mike Majorco and my colleague Justin Jungle will be talking about CIP skids and how to implement them into your facility. And if you did miss previous webinars and you want to go back and view them, the list of the past ones are below there. We went through wort aeration and oxygenation, carbonation, inline, as well as carbo blending and dosing systems. So if you need to find those previous webinars, you can head over to gusmerbeer.com/Denwel slash Denwel web or hyphen webinars, sorry, excuse me, and click on those, and you should be able to watch them and pause them and come up with any questions. And if you do have questions on anything you found in the webinar that's not answered during the Q&A, then you can head over and click on the Find a Rep button. As Mike Majorco said, you can reach out to your individual Gusmer representative for your area, and they should be able to help you with any questions that you might come up with on these systems or anything else that we do at Gusmer. Just thank you for joining us today, and we appreciate your attention.